machine, but many people don't understand it, or they don't agree how it works, and this is when a lot of leaders economists suffer. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to share my simple, practical economy template. Though it's unconventional, this helped me to anticipate on the sidestep global financial asset, and it is worked out for 30 years. Let's begin. Though the economy might seem complex, we work in a simple mechanical way. It's made for simple parts, simple transactions that are repeated over and over again a zillion times. These transactions are above where it's driven by human nature and the creative process drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debt cycle. And number three, the long-term debt cycle. And look at this process how ring them on top of which each other create good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's just study industrial economy transactions. An economy, the simple transactions make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make transactions all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of buyer exchanging money or credit with the seller for goods and services, financial assets. Credit spent just like money, so adding together the money spent, the amount in credit, is the total spending. The total amount spent drives the economy. If you divide the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That transaction is the building block economy machine. All cycles, all process economy driven by huge transaction. So if you can understand transaction, you can understand the whole economy. Our market consists of all the buyers and all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is wheat market, car market, or stock market. Market is millions of things. An economy consists by all of the transactions all over its market. If you add up total spending and total quantity sold in all of the market, you everything market everything understand economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, banks, and government all engage transactions to the what I just described, exchanging money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer sellers government consists of two important parts. Central bank government collects taxes, expensive money, and central banks each different buyer sellers because it controls the amount of money and credit economy. It does this by influencing interest rate, printing your money. For this reason, as you will see, the central banks important player in the flow of credit. I want you to pay attention credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably least understood. It's the most important part, for the biggest, most popular part. Just like buyers, sellers go to the market to make their transaction. So the lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make the money into more money, and borrowers usually buy something you can mechanical for, like a house or a car, but they want to invest in something like a steady business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. Borrowers promise to repay the borrow called principal plus an additional amount called interest. When interest is high, there is less to borrow because it's expensive. When interest rates low, borrow increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. Any two people can agree credit out of thin air. That is simple enough, but credit is tricky because it's different name. As soon as credit is created, it immediately in debt. Debt is both asset to the lender and liability to borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset liability disappear and the transaction is zero. So why is credit so important? because when a borrower receives its credit, it increases spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend is someone else. Every dollar you want, someone else spend. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes the lenders more willing to lend the money because now it's more worthy credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: ability to pay and collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to that gives him money ability to repay. Eventually repay, he adds value of the asset used as collateral that can be sold. This makes when comparable money. So increases income allows increased borrowing, which allows increased spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increased borrowing and so on. This improves patterns, economic growing, YAF cycles. In a transaction, you have give something, you have to get something. How much it gives, how much it produces. Over time, you run and not accumulate knowledge, raises on living standards. We grow this productivity grow. Those in eventually hard work raise the productivity living standard faster. The nose complex and lazy. But that is necessarily true of short run. Productivity matters long run, but credit is matters short run. This is because the growth in fluctuate much, so it's not a big growth in economic swings. That is because it allows consumer to introduce more required, and it forces consumer rest in produce when you have to pay it back. That swings in curve is two big cycle. One take 5 to 8 years, the other says 7500 years. Well, most people fear the thing, they typically touch them, and because they see them cross day by day, week by week, and the statue in the step back to get these three big forces and have the response experience. As mentioned, swings allow you not to how much innovation or hard work there is probably how much credit there is. Let's borrow second image the economy without credit. In the second economy, the only increases my spending is increased income, which quarter made productive and do more work. Increased productivity is the only way for growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I run your analysis more productive. If we follow the transaction and play this out, we see progression like the product growth line. Because we borrow, we have a cycle. This is due to any law regulation. It's due to human nature and the way the credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can afford, you need to spend more than you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create a time in the future that you need to spend less than you make in order to pay back. A very quick example cycle. Basically, anytime you borrow, you create a cycle. This is as true for individual as it is for economy. This is why I understand credit is so important because it set into motion a mechanical predictable series of events that will happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is one set of transactions with. When you buy a bill from a patent with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy a bill with credit, it's like starting a bartender. You're saying you promise to pay in the future. Together you earn bartender credit asset in a buyer and a liability. You just create credit out of thin air. It's not until you pay the bartender later that the asset and the liability disappear, that the debt goes away and the transaction is settled. The reality is that most of what people call money is actually credit. The total amount of credit in the United States about $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy with credit, the only way to increase your spending is to produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase your spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has more spending and allows incomes to rise faster than productivity over the short run, but not over the long run. Don't get me wrong. Credit isn't necessarily something bad that just causes cycle. It's bad when it finances overconsumption that can be paid back. However, it's good when an efficiently allocates resources and produces income so you can pay back to that. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, if it doesn't generate income to fully pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to buy save a tractor, and an electric paper helps more crops and more money, then you can pay back your debt, improve your living standards. In an economy with credit, we then follow the transactions and see how credit grows. Let me give you an example. Suppose you want $100,000 and you have no debt. You are credit worthy enough to borrow $10,000, say on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 even though you own your $100,000. Since your spending is another person's income, someone is currently $110,000. The person earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000, so he can spend $121,000 even though he has only earned $110,000. His spending is another person's income, and by following the transaction, we can begin to see how this process works in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing created cycles, and if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This leads us into short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases, we see an expansion, the first phase of the short-term debt cycle. Spending continuously increases and some prices start to rise. This happens because increases in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instead or out of thin air. When the amount of spending comes grow faster than production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes a problem. Seeing price rise, it raises interest rate. With high interest rates, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of the existing debt rises. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have high debt payments, they have less money left over the spend, so spending slows. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop and so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases when you have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to cause everything to pick up again. With the low interest rates, debt repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up. And you see another expansion. As we can see, the economy works like a machine. In the short-term debt cycle, spending is constrained only by the willingness of lenders or borrowers to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there's an economic expansion. When credit isn't easily available, there's a recession. And note that this cycle is controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and top of the rich cycle with more growth in the previous cycle and with more debt. Why? Because people proceeded. They have an inclination to borrow and spend more instead of paying back debt. It's human nature. Because of this, over a long period of time, debt rises faster than incomes, created a long-term debt cycle created. Despite people becoming more indebted, then there's even more pre-extend credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Incomes have been rising. Asset values are going up. The stock market news is a boom. It's paid by goods, services, and financial assets with borrowed money. When people do a lot of that, we call it a bubble. So we do the been growing incomes have been growing nearly as fast ups and downs. Let's go this ratio of debt to income, the debt burden. So long as incomes continue to rise, the burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset value is soar. People borrow huge amounts of the money buy assets investment, causing their prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even with the accumulation of a lot of debt, rising incomes and asset value have borrowers remained creditworthy for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever. And it doesn't. Over decades, the burden slowly increases, creating large and large debt repayments. At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And since a person's spending is another person's income, incomes begin to go down, which make people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further, and the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burdens have simply become too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan 1989 and in the United States back in 1929. And now the economy begins deleveraging. In the deleveraging, people cut spending, incomes fall, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock market crashes. Social tensions rise and hold this trend and finally the other way. As incomes fall and their repayments rise, borrowers get squeezed. No longer creditworthy, credit drives up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. Scrambling to fill this hole, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The rush to sell assets pulls the market at the same time as the spending falls. This is when the stock market collapses. The real estate market tanks and banks get into trouble. As the prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can drop. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People fear for credit repetitively fear. Less spending, less income, less wealthy, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to recession, but the difference here is that interest rates can be borrowed to stay there. In a recession, lowering interest rates will also stimulate borrowing. However, in a leveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930 and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and deleveraging is that the non-deleveraged borrowers, the burdens have simply got too big and kept relieved by lowering interest rate. Lenders realize that debts have become too large to ever be fully paid back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay. The collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders stop lending. Borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, just like any individual. So what do you do about the leveraging? The problem is that burdens are too high and they must come down. There are 4 ways this can happen. 1. People, businesses, and governments cut their spending. 2. Debts are reduced for restructuring. 3. Wealth is reduced from the haves to the have-nots. And finally, 4. The central bank prints new money. These 4 ways have been happened in every deleveraging modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As we just saw, people, businesses, and even governments tighten their belts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking on new debt and start paying down old debt, you might expect the debt burden to decrease. But the opposite happens. Because spending is cut, and one man's spending is another man's income, it causes incomes to poor. Therefore, faster than debt repaid and their burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cutting spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher employment. This leads to next step. Debts must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and a borrower's debts are lenders' asset. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous and the bank won't be able to repay them. So they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed, and people, businesses, and banks default on their debt. This severe economic contraction is depression. A big part of depression is people discovering much of what they thought was their wealth is really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you borrow beer and put it on a bar tab, you promise to repay the bartender. Your promise became an asset of the bartender. But when you break your promise, if you don't pay him back and essentially default on your bar tab, then the asset isn't really worth anything. It has basically disappeared. Many lenders don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means lenders get paid back less or get paid back over a longer time frame or at a lower interest rate than was first agreed. Somehow, contracts have been broken in a way that reduces debt. Lenders would rather have a little of something than all of nothing. Even though debt disappears, debt restructuring causes income and asset values to disappear faster, so the debt burden continues to get worse. Like cutting spending, debt reduction is also painful and deflationary. All of this impacts the central governments because lower incomes, less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, it needs to increase its spending because employment has risen. Many of employed have unallocated savings and need to finance support from the government. Additionally, governments create stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government's budget deficit is growing the leverage because they spend more than earning in the taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the budget deficit news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But with incomes falling and so many unemployed, who is the money going to come from? The rich. Since the governments need more money, and since the wealth is heavily concentrated in the hands of the small percentage of the people, governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates a redistribution of wealth in the economy, from the haves to the have-nots. But have-nots who are supporting begin to resent the wealthy haves. The wealthy have been squeezed by the weak economy, falling asset prices, and high taxes begin to resent to have-nots. If the difference continues, social disorder can break out. Not only do tensions rise within countries, they can rise between countries, especially incredible countries. This situation can lead to political change that can sometimes be extreme. In the 1930s, this led Hitler coming to power, war in Europe, and depression in the United States. Pressure to do something to end depression increases. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit is here, people don't have enough money. People are desperate for money, and you remember who can print money? The central bank can. Having already lowered its interest rates to nearly zero, it's forced to print money. Unlike cutting spending, debt reduction, and wealth redistribution, printing money is inflationary and stimulus. Inevitable the central bank prints new money out of thin air and uses it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression and again 2008 when the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, printed over the $2 trillion. Other central banks around the world could print a lot of money too. By buying financial assets with this money, it helped drive the asset up prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps the one financial asset. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the other hand, can buy goods and services, put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So, in order to stimulate the economy, the two must cooperate. By buying government bonds, and central bank essentially lends money to the government, allowing it to run a deficit and increase spending on goods and services through its stimulus program and employment benefits. This increases free income as well as the government spend. However, it will lower the economy total debt burden. This is very risky time. Policymakers need to balance the poor ways that the burdens come down. The deflationary wave need to balance with the inflationary rate in order to maintain stability. If balanced correctly, there can be a beautiful deleveraging. You see, a deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can a deleveraging be beautiful? Even though deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation the best possible way is beautiful. A lot more beautiful than the difficult, unbalanced excesses at a deleveraging pace. In a beautiful deleveraging, debt declines relative to income. Real economic growth is possible and inflation isn't a problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spending, reducing debt, transporting wealth, and printing money so that the economy's social stability can be maintained. Simplest printing money will raise inflation. It won't offset printing credit. Remember, spending is what matters. A dollar of spending paper with money has the same effect on prices of dollars of spending paper with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the disappearance of credit with increases in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not only pump up income growth, but get the rate of income growth higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow faster than debt grows. For example, let's assume that the country is going to do with leveraging as a debt income ratio of 100%. That means that the amount of debt has is the same as the amount of income and interest amount country makes in a year. Now think about the interest rate on that debt. Let's say it's 2%. If debt is growing at 2% because of that interest rate and income is only growing at around 1%, you will never reduce that debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate of income grow above the rate interest. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and prepare into the ultimate. The key is to avoid printing much money and causing unacceptably high inflation the way Germany did during the leveraging in the 1920s. If policymakers achieve the right balance, or the leveraging is so dramatic, growth is slow but debt burdens go down. That's a beautiful leveraging. When income begins to rise, borrow begin to appear more credit. Appear more creditworthy and borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. Debt burdens finally begin to pour. Able to borrow money, people can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to inflation and pay over the long-term debt cycle. Though the leverage process can be hard if handled badly. If handled well, it will eventually fix the problem. It takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to recover in economic activity to get back to normal and sustain lost decades. In closing, of course, economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, laying the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle, and the length of the part of them on top of the productivity growth line gives a reasonably good template for seeing where we've been, where we're now, and where we're probably headed. So in summary, there are three rules of thumb I'd like to take away from this. First, don't have them rise faster than income because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity because you will eventually become uncompatible. And third, you do all that you can to raise to your productivity because in the long run, that's what matters most. This is simple advice for you, and it's a simple advice for a policymaker. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me, and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.